Today is January 2nd. It's the second day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. The largest spy case in U.S. history comes to a close on this day in 1942, when 33 members of the Duquesne Spy Ring are sentenced collectively to over 300 years in prison after being convicted of espionage for Germany. Most of the convicted are German natives who become naturalized U.S. citizens in the late 1920s and early 1930s. And the information they transmit to Berlin consists of items such as sailing dates and cargoes of ships full of war supplies that are bound for England, information about automobile and airplane manufacturing, blueprints of gun emplacements being installed on merchant marine vessels, and designs for the top-secret Norden bomb site. In addition to stealing top-secret plans and information for the Germans, some members of the Duquesne Spy Ring are tasked with creating discontent among union workers, with the aim of disrupting U.S. war production with strikes. The spy ring operates out of the Little Casino restaurant in the Upper East Side of Manhattan in a neighborhood called Yorkville, and its ringleader is a fellow named Fritz Duquesne. Duquesne works first for the Works Progress Administration and later for the Air Terminals Company, which is where he's approached by a German agent and asked to spy for Germany. As a spy, Duquesne writes a letter to the Chemical Warfare Service requesting information on a new gas mask they're developing, closing the letter by saying, quote, "Don't be too concerned if this information is confidential, because it will be in the hands of a good patriotic citizen." The Chemical Warfare Service sends him the information, and Duquesne promptly forwards it to his German handler, William Siebold. Siebold reports directly to Berlin, but unbeknownst to Duquesne, Siebold is a double agent, and he also reports to the FBI. In fact, Siebold's office in Times Square is outfitted with a two-way mirror, FBI agents on the other side with a film camera watching and filming Duquesne when he drops off and divulges classified material to his German handler. The spy ring is rolled up in 1941, and on this day in 1942, just a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Fritz Duquesne is sentenced to 18 years in prison for betraying his country. Duquesne is sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas, where he's repeatedly beaten by other prisoners. The double agent William Siebold moves to California and lives the rest of his days as a chicken farmer. President Richard Nixon signs the National Maximum Speed Law, lowering the maximum U.S. speed limit to 55 miles per hour on this day in 1974. It's a reaction by the federal government to oil price spikes and supply disruptions during the 1973 oil crisis. Members of OPEC, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, have been hit hard by the devaluation of the dollar since the price of oil is tied to the dollar instead of gold. And in October of 1973, they're miffed by U.S. and Western aid to Israel in the Yom Kippur War. In response, some members of OPEC declare an oil embargo in an effort to manipulate the Western world's support of Israel in the war, and to jack up their profits with an increase in the price of crude. The price of oil quadruples in a matter of months, and by early 1974, the U.S. is feeling the pain at the pump, to say the least. U.S. consumers are already affected by the dollar's devaluation, and the embargo comes right in the middle of the 1973-1974 stock market crash. The fiscal pressure caused by the cost of the Vietnam War and the federal debt burden puts a lot of pressure on the economy at the beginning of the 1970s. To deal with this, the U.S. abandons the Bretton Woods monetary management system as well as the gold exchange standard, which ties the value of the dollar to the price of gold. These actions lead to a monetary collapse and a devaluation of the dollar. which in turn leads to the 1973-74 stock market crash. Okay, it's not quite that simple, but in a nutshell, because of this series of fiscal decisions, the U.S. economy in 1973 is in the crapper. The OPEC oil embargo is referred to as the oil shock, and later as the first oil shock, because, well, there's another oil shock coming in 1979, but that's for another day. Federal experts predict that the move to a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, signed into law on this day in 1974, will reduce oil consumption by 2.2%, thus alleviating some of the strain on U.S. consumers. Later analysis shows the lower speed limit reduces oil consumption by only 0.2 to 0.5%. However, the National Institute of Health estimates that road fatalities declined 16% in the year following the law's implementation. There's great resistance to the national speed limit throughout the states, and 21 years later, in 1995, Congress removes all federal control of speed limits in the National Highway Designation Act. And the following year, road fatalities increase 3.2%. Born on this day in 1948, journalist and author Judith Miller. Miller earns a master's degree from Princeton's School of Public and International Affairs and lands a job as a reporter for the New York Times. She's one of the recipients of the Pulitzer Prize for the Times' coverage of global terrorism in the time of the 9/11 attacks. Later, Miller covers security issues for the paper, focusing in part on weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Citing Bush administration officials, she reports that metal tubes used for enriching nuclear material were intercepted en route to Iraq. Her articles are subsequently used by Bush administration officials as support for their case that Iraq is pursuing WMD. These and other articles about WMD in the lead-up to the war are called into question and later determined to be based on problematic sources. Miller resigns in October 2005, but not before she is jailed for contempt of court for refusing to identify her sources to a grand jury investigating the leak of the identity of CIA officer Valerie Plame. In a July 2003 column, Robert Novak outs Plame, whose secret identity is presumably leaked to Novak by Scooter Libby, Vice President Cheney's chief of staff. Judith Miller is called as a witness in the leak trial of Scooter Libby to testify to her meetings with an unnamed government official, but she declines to divulge her source, citing reporter's privilege. Judith Miller, born on this day in 1948, spends 85 days in jail for contempt of court, testifying as to her source only after she confirms Libby's waiver of his expectations of confidentiality. Scooter Libby is convicted of 4 of the 5 counts he faces, all charges except the count relating to the leak of Valerie Plame's identity, which, it turns out, was leaked by Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage, who is never charged for the leak. There are 363 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it today. I really appreciate all of your support and the kind words, both on Facebook and Twitter and all of that. It's really great. And I also really appreciate it when you share the show, when you retweet, when you share on Facebook, when you do all that kind of stuff. If you love this show and you have not shared it with your friends yet, please go ahead and do that. Pass it along, share it with them. They're going to love it as much as you do. So if you're still listening, there is no such thing as a sugar substitute. Talk to you tomorrow.